Okay, so welcome everyone to this special Ask Us Anything to mark the launch of our latest issue on the global far right. My name is Amy Hall, and I'm one of the co-editors at New Internationalist magazine. From the UK to Australia and India to the US, we're seeing a disturbing and at times violent emboldening of far-right politics from the streets to the ballot box. And we know our readers are passionate about this issue. So earlier this year, we launched a fundraising campaign called Rewire the World to bolster our reporting on the global far right, including publishing an issue of New Internationalist dedicated to exposing and tackling the politics of hate and division. If you can see it, it's this one here. It's a little bit blurry, I'm afraid. But we're really grateful to the more than 900 people around the world who generously donated to help us raise more than £60,000 to fund this issue and some of our other journalism on the far right. To mark the launch of the magazine, we've invited you to meet our editors and contributors to learn more about their reporting and to ask them questions directly. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce our panel for today. Bethany Riley is a journalist, activist and co-editor at New Internationalist, where she commissions and writes stories related to global justice. Her recent work for New Internationalist has covered subjects such as the rise of the global far right, reproductive justice, and surveillance. And her keynote feature in our latest magazine looks at the new far right today and how we got here and what we can do about it. Josefina Salomon is a journalist and researcher covering human rights, inequality, gender, and security issues in Latin America. She spends her time between her native Buenos Aires and London. Josefina has written a feature as part of our current big story, which looks at how Argentina's working class led social movements are stepping in as Javier Milei slashes food aid to the country's most impoverished communities. Balázs Torshan is a long-time member of the Hungarian Szélső movement, a Green Left political organization. He's just completed a master's degree at Central European University, where he studied right-wing movements in Hungary and the US. And in our current magazine, he joins Conor Mulhern of the Reactionary International Research Project to investigate the shadowy advisor working behind the scenes to export Orbanism beyond Hungary. And then finally, Kim Kelly is a Labour reporter and author based in Philadelphia in the US. She's a regular contributor to In These Times and Teen Vogue, and her writing on Labour, politics, and culture has appeared in many other publications. And she's the author of Fight Like Hell, The Untold History of American Labour. And her piece for the magazine looks at how anti-fascism is rooted in the history of America's labour movement. And she calls for a revival of that tradition to fight Trumpism today. So thanks all of you for joining us. It's really good to have you here. So I'm going to kick off with some questions that we've kind of had in advance, but please do share questions in the chat. My colleagues Decca and Rod are here to help us kind of field the chat and answer any questions. So Beth, I just wanted to start with you. The far right tends to argue that if it hasn't literally got a swastika on it, that it's not extreme. Can you explain how we defined the far right in the issue of the magazine, but also what some of the definitions and tenets people should be aware of?
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, so it's a big question, and it's something I asked every researcher I was involved with doing this big story. Because yeah, the far right today, the parties that we see all have their own kind of distinct histories and agendas, and there are many different kind of contradictions between them, so it can be hard to box them in. But broadly speaking, there are commonalities and there are threads that we can use today to define them. So how we did this in the magazine is authoritarianism, nationalism, and the rejection of minority rights. When it comes to authoritarianism, there are kind of elements of the far right that kind of advocate for a full takeover of the state and dictatorship, whereas there are others who kind of operate working within the democratic system and kind of say on the face of things they agree with democracy, but oppose the rule of law, separation of powers, independent media. When it comes to nationalism, this sort of hyper-nationalism, ethno-nationalism, like we see in Israel today, or in Modi's India with Hindutva, which is a Hindu supremacy, Hindu supremacist nationalism, and the rejection of minority rights, so women's rights, migrant rights, the rights of queer communities. Um, and then there are kind of new ideological currents as well that we see with the new far right today. Um, there's something that kind of unites disparate projects, such as the kind of Great Replacement theory. So this is a kind of racist conspiracy theory that people sort of believe that migrants are replacing native populations. We see that this in the US and in Orban's Hungary, for example, but also in Modi's India, where Hindu nationalists propagate the idea of a kind of demographic erasure by Muslims. And this then ties into another kind of conspiracy theory, this idea of gender ideology, the natural family, which is they define as a nuclear biological family, and traditional values being under threat from gains in gender equality, LGBTQI plus rights, and that this is driving the breakdown of our societies. And it's interesting to see that this language kind of pops up in very different places. So you can see, Erdogan in Turkey talking about the natural family, and he declared this year the year of the family, while then also cracking down on LGBT rights even further in Turkey. And you see this language as well popping up among European far-right leaders and also in Latin America as well. And when it comes to tenets, very heavy on law and order and militarism, also anti-globalization threads as well, but this kind of less applies to sort of far-right movements of the global south. So yeah, this is kind of how we define the far right in the magazine. But yeah, it's not so easy to define, and there's a lot of different threads and schools of thought about it.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, and I'd be interested to hear what everyone else thinks as we go on as well. But I had a question that I kind of wanted to ask a few of you, which was about why you think far right parties, like political parties, have been on the rise around the world. And Balazs, I was wondering if I could come to you first on that one.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult to answer right now in Hungary because we are in a really different political discourse. I think Orban was one of the leading figures of this new right movement globally, one of them, and he has sort of lost his momentum right now, so he's already behind when others are rising up. But yeah, I would say my short answer is that um, people are fed up with the precarious lives that they are living under neoliberalism, and that they are associating with the third way and quote unquote leftist liberal movements, and I think that far right parties are very deft at sort of at least discursively grab that political momentum and use that frustration in their favor.
Yeah, thank you. And actually I was wondering, Josephina, I know Balazs just mentioned about the kind of slightly like changing political situation in Hungary, but Javier Milei has also kind of maybe had a bit of a dent in popularity, and I was wondering kind of what you thought about that and whether you see any hope there. And then Kim, it would be interesting to hear your perspective from the US as well.
Yes, I mean, yeah, for sure. I think there's been the election that happened over the weekend, where the opposition, the Peronist movement, really it won by 14% difference in terms of the Milei's party, and that really put a massive dent on popularity of Milei, and it really it was a great illustration on where the far right is at the moment. And I think, following on from what Balazs was saying, I think the interesting thing that we're seeing in Latin America when we ask ourselves the question of why do people support these far right movements, we're really seeing populations really swing between parties. So we see it in Argentina, we're seeing it at the moment. So Milei won with quite a decent amount of support, and now that support is swinging. We saw it in Brazil. So they had Bolsonaro, a really far right politician, and came kind of from a new party, new far right party, a new thing for Brazil. And then Lula, the complete opposite, came after him. And we're seeing that in many countries. So in a way, lots of the experts that I've spoken to have told me this is about people trying to find solutions, and in a way, a bit of desperate solutions to some of the problems they're facing. And most of those issues are to do with the economics, right? To trying to make it to the end of the month. Then you've got these far-right politicians offering magical solutions that then clearly don't work. And then people kind of support them at first, and then they realize those solutions in many of in Latin America, a lot of those solutions have to do with neoliberal economic policies supported by economic interests and global institutions like the International Monetary Fund. So these aren't just national ideas. And then when they don't work, then people kind of stop supporting them and go back to other parties that were in power before.
Yeah, thanks, Josephina. Kim, what's your kind of perspective in the US, and I guess with Trump coming back and everything that's been happening there in politics?
Like the other two panelists mentioned, so much of it comes down to the economy, to capitalism, to the fact that people are struggling under these systems that are built to oppress them, to exploit their labor, to exploit and extract every piece of their being. There's so many people who are exploited or hunted down or dehumanized just a little extra because of who they are, where they come from, who they love, their identity, all of this. And in the States, we also have something that I don't know if it gets mentioned as much in sort of these global conversations about the rise of the far right. Religion, specifically extremist, Christian, fundamentalist, like Christo-fascist ideology is deeply embedded in the current far right movement, to the point where like we are on our way to becoming a theocratic nation, even more so than we are already. It's all tied together with the fact, with all these different factors, whether it's the down spiral in American manufacturing and the jobs that came with that, these neoliberal policies, the incredible weakness of our so-called opposition party, which is, in fairness, like the Democratic Party is a center-right party, right? The Republicans are a far-right party. Neither of those are looking out for the people. Corporate interests and our many evil billionaires really control so much of the political landscape that regular people just feel hopeless. And so when you have these demagogues, these authoritarians, these pseudo-populists that try and say that all of your problems are based on someone else. It's the queer people, it's the trans people, it's immigrants, it's Black folks, it's anybody but you is where the problem is. And we're gonna hurt them. We're gonna fix everything. We're gonna take care of you as long as you're, a white guy who prays more times a day than I have since I was like 12. Like there's all these different currents, and we're also an incredibly violent nation, and all of this kind of comes together into this really gnarly primordial soup that obviously the rise of Trump and then the rebound of Trump has not helped any of that, because so much of that far right rhetoric has been mainstreamed and become government policy in a way that I think people didn't necessarily expect when he first appeared, God, almost 10 years ago. It's really just kind of all of these different factors being exacerbated by the people in power and exacerbated by the fact that so many people here are struggling and suffering. We have no safety net. We have nothing to save us. If you fall into poverty, if you fall into homelessness, no one's going to be there to help you up. So why not blame somebody else for your problems? Because getting rid of this entire exploitative system, the people in power don't want that to happen. So You got to blame somebody else. And unfortunately, that someone else is usually the most marginalized and vulnerable people.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, and I guess it's been a pretty wild, like 24 hours or so in the US. We've seen the high profile right-wing commentator Charlie Kirk, who was shot dead in Utah. And what's it been like there, I guess, so far? Like, and do you kind of think there might be a kind of backlash against people like Black and LGBTQ communities who were kind of the focus of some of his attacks?
Yeah, the thing is that in the context of what happens in the States, like it's not that big a deal. Like that event was the 46th school shooting of the year. But at the exact same time, the 47th was unfolding in Colorado, where 3 children were shot at school. So remember when Malcolm X said that the chickens come home to roost? When you're preaching violent fascist rhetoric, you know, these things tend to happen. But it is unfortunate that this event, this assassination, is going to have a ripple effect on the exact same people that he demonized and attacked in life. Like you mentioned, Black folks, like the dude's final words were basically spewing out a racist dog whistle. The fact that one of the earlier reports about that, they still haven't caught the shooter also, and we've been seeing kind of these dueling narratives sort of erupt around it. No one's quite sure what's happening because the people in charge of the FBI, federal law enforcement, are like clowns. Like they're Trump appointees. They don't know how to do anything, which is a little bit funny, but also not great in this context because there's misinformation coming out. The right and mainstream Democrats are trying to blame the left, or not mainstream Democrats, mainstream Republicans are trying to blame the left for their violent rhetoric. And the far right thinks it was one of them, or they think it was a trans person because that's the newest go-to scapegoat. And the sort of neoliberal blue MAGA Democrat types think that it's a false flag to distract from the Epstein files. Like our media environment is so broken that it's really difficult to find out what's actually happening at the best of times. And an event like this, it's really difficult to understand what to be worried about next, you know? But the biggest takeaway is that this is not going to be good for anybody. We're already in this moment of authoritarian crackdowns, of people being kidnapped on the street, of trans people being demonized and hunted, of incredibly racist policies being made, federal law. Like no one is really safe. And now that the far right, which equals the mainstream government, have their martyr figure, and the mainstream media is falling in line, sending thoughts and prayers. You know, I live in a democratic state theoretically, and where our flags are at half mast today for this racist fascist. Like it's not going to be good. We're not entirely sure what's coming next, but this is certainly fuel on a fire that is going to start licking at our heels any day now.
Yeah, thank you. It's kind of scary to see, yeah, what might happen next. And I guess like one of the things about people like Charlie Kirk, but also others, plenty of others, like the messaging that they would use is like cut through with its simplicity. And this is one of the questions that came in via Instagram actually, about how far-right messaging can really kind of somehow manages to reach people. And how kind of I wondered what you all thought about how we can counter that kind of very simplistic messaging that really seems to like get through to people. Yeah, I'll leave it to anyone to jump in on that one.
Yeah, they do use just very simplistic narratives, like the other panelists have said, to basically shift the discontent that people feel towards groups of people, rather than the wider systemic problems that we have that are a bit more hard to kind of communicate. But yeah, in terms of like cutting through in a simple way, I always think of this, I don't know if you've seen it as well, but it's that cartoon of like two construction workers, and the white construction worker has a couple cookies and the migrant construction worker has one cookie. And then there's a boss in the middle who's got a whole pile of cookies behind him, and he's saying that guy's trying to steal your cookie. And I think it's just a sort of, you know, it's a very effective way of saying who are the real culprits here, who is really driving like global inequality. I think there are ways to do it through art, through cartoons, to get these messages across. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear what the people think, also in different contexts as well.
Just quickly, because I've been speaking a lot already, this is a place where I think labor organizing can be incredibly beneficial, because if you think about it, there are very few instances in your life where you're around a bunch of different people. You haven't chosen me in their company. You're all there for a common goal. You all have a common enemy, your boss. That's what your workplace is. You don't pick your coworkers, but you can figure out what your common ground is. You can find your common issues. You can organize against your boss. It's going to a union meeting or getting involved in a union and organizing is a great way to interact with people that maybe think differently from you, have different experiences, come from someone different, but you have that common ground. And I've seen it firsthand. Like, this is labor organizing is one of the things that makes me really hopeful about combating this, especially when unions and organizers put that effort into really emphasizing that this is not a Black versus white, immigrant versus born here. Like, this is all artificial division to distract you from the fact that you're getting screwed by this boss, by this CEO, by this industry. It's like you said, the cartoon about the cookies, like, that is incredibly real. And that's why we've seen some of the more, I think, encouraging action taking against the far right, especially in terms of the immigration raids we're dealing with, are coming from the labor world, because you can't, that's where you have to listen to people and understand that you are on the same team. And that's very difficult to do in basically any other context in this country, at least.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah, Josephina, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I'll jump in because I couldn't agree more with Kim, and it's fascinating to hear the example from Bethany as well, because and just kind of to bring those two together. Here in Argentina, we are very fortunate that we have a very strong social movements, from trade unions to even football clubs, to just everyone is a very common thing to be organized around a cause that affects you, because everyone is affected by a cause, right? And because of our recent history, the dictatorships that we have suffered, etc. And the interesting thing was that, yes, the far right is extremely smart in having these symbols. So Javier Milei won the presidency practically coming from nowhere with this image of a chainsaw. He wanted to destroy the state. In Argentina, the state is very important. So here we have public health, public education, free university education, free science research, and we're very proud of that. That really is what is. Many people would agree, I think, that that's one of the things that makes Argentina what it is. We've suffered for many years because for many years it was under threat, and now we recovered it. And so yeah, then this president comes in and says, I'm going to destroy all of this, and with this message of everybody for themselves. So this message that I think is very popular around the world now, that is, if you want to be rich, you can work a lot and then you'll be rich. If you want to be fine, just work, or just drive an Uber or do deliveries. And then if you work hard enough, you're going to make it. This false narrative that I think a lot of people are buying into, which we know isn't really the case, right? There's so many other factors around whether somebody can make it to the end of the month or not. And very interestingly, different culture, from filmmakers to songwriters, they really came with products. Like, there is a really famous TV show called The Eternaut. I don't know if people will be familiar with it. It's on a very famous platform at the moment. And the show is a national production, so we're very proud of that. It was done kind of independently, but became really successful. The message is a sci-fi kind of end of the world, but the message of it is no one can make it alone. So this is a world where there are some aliens coming in and people can't, the hero is not an individual. He's a hero that can save himself with the help of his community and his family. And it's a high production. So it was super popular on this platform. Everyone watched it. And people really took to that and said, okay, that's our message. No one, and it's kind of the headline that Bethany and I put to our story, but the message is no one can make it alone. So we all have to go and protest when the government wants to cut funding for public hospitals or for pensioners or for the science research or for education or for whatever it is. It is our collective responsibility to go out and go against that. But just to go back to the original thing, there was this having this simple message and imagery was really helpful in uniting people in a very simplified way. So I think social movements overall, internationally, need to do a lot more work on that. I think the far right sometimes is better than the rest of us at explaining complex issues. So there is a lot more work, but it's definitely worth it. So yeah.
Thanks. And Balázs, did you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, just to give a Hungarian example, I think very good illustration of good and bad messaging is the difference between some of you might have heard about this new sort of oppositional messiah that we have in Hungary, who I do have my critiques about. His party is not a particularly bottom-up party. It's pretty much centered around his figure, and he is a center-right figure, although he's getting better a little bit. But it's true that he's a very capable politician, and he's very good at political messaging, as opposed to what some people, and I don't like this term, but some people call the old opposition or the old left in Hungary. And yeah, just one example about the blunders of the old opposition in Hungary was in 2019 when a law that was popularized as the slave law was passed by the Fidesz-dominated parliament, which damaged labor rights in insane ways in terms of overtime payment, unions, etc. And there was like mass organization by the people who were targeted negatively by this law, and it was a huge momentum. And at the same time, Fidesz banned another law, basically exiling one of our biggest liberal universities in Hungary, Central European University, because of its, because it had a course on gender, and it was pretty bad. I went to see you myself, and it was bad, but it didn't really resonate that much with people at the time. And what oppositional leaders did at the time was that they completely forgot about like labor rights and labor organization, and jumped right into that issue, which is, it's important, but it doesn't resonate with masses of the people. And I think the two should have been, connected, sort of. And similar blunders, there were plenty of them. Like, for example, the biggest issues of old oppositional parties were like freedom of the press, which is a great cause, but nobody really talked about cost of living. While this new guy is doing that all the time, and he's really good at making a contrast between Orban and his billionaire friends versus the people who are living in increasingly precarious lives. So I think that should be the focus of political messaging, like issues that really resonate with the everyday lives of people.
Yeah, thanks, Balázs. And we actually had a question in the chat from Ben about about what other things that we can do on the left. So he says, how have the far right managed to create coalitions across such diverse contexts? And it seems very strange to me that they can be racial/national supremacists from different countries. And why is the left not able to do the same? Or are they? Like, what kind of examples have you seen of this kind of coalition building?
I do think that a lot of the far right movements are animated by very basic kind of agreements. Like if you can disagree on policy or on specific laws or specific points of ideology with someone, but if you're both like, I'm cool with racism, or I'm cool with hating trans people and queer people and women, or white supremacy, ultimate goal, we want to do Christo-fascism, however we get there. I think it's clearly like it's a little easier to organize around, like, screw those people, we want to take care of our people, versus like on the left we have so many different ideas and so many different ideologies and so many different disagreements and so many different priorities because there's a lot going on. And I don't know if the answer is for every left-leaning person to coalesce around one thing, whether it's, like a living wage or basic human rights for all people that live here or amnesty for immigrants. That would be nice, but I feel like there's just I don't know why we're so bad at it, but I think it's because we there's such a diversity of ideas and sort of like ideologies on the left that it can be hard to agree even just at your local anarchist collective meeting, right? Like that could be a 5-hour meeting deciding on what you're doing that Sunday. The far right doesn't have that problem because they don't care as much. And I think the far right is also sort of more engineered towards accepting like a hierarchical structure. Like they kind of look for leaders, for strongmen, for martyrs, because there is, at least in the States, there's still that Christo-fascist sort of thing operating where it's like very male supremacist, white male supremacist, in a way that, again, you're not seeing on the left, at least in the States. So yeah, it's weird. I don't know what the deal is in other countries necessarily, but I think some of those factors might also come into play. And I really want to hear from the other panelists about what they think.
Yeah, I think we can all relate, like anyone who's been involved in progressive, like left-wing organizing, of spending way too long on trying to, have consensus on a decision, and we're thinking in that point moment, maybe we should have a leader, like maybe we should be top down, but no. Yeah, so it is really interesting that there are even movements that seem fundamentally opposed to one another will unite over racism, and this is something I see in Spain too. I'm based in Barcelona. In Spain, there's the far right Vox party, and in Catalonia, there's a specific far right Catalan supremacist party that want to have an independent state, an independent country of Catalonia, which Vox are against, and that's actually how they became so popular, a few years ago. But they are collaborating with one another because they share a hatred of Muslims, and they're both very Islamophobic. So yeah, it's the kind of united power of racism, and overcoming differences because they have a stronger enemy, which I just find quite disturbing. But yeah, I think in left movements we've sort of lost a lot of our tradition of anti-fascist organizing, of internationalism as well, that were really strong in our movements in the last century. And that's something that we need to kind of get back again. And there are some amazing efforts at the moment to unite struggles across borders. I think, when we see movements that are coming up, all these, like a huge upswell of solidarity in support of Palestine, against the genocide. These are all things that we can kind of like mobilize from as well. But yeah, it's something I think maybe we need to look back at past movements to inform our movements today.
Yeah, thank you. So we had another question about political parties. Actually a couple of questions. So I might just like kind of summarize both of them. So the first one was about what kind of responses you think our political parties should be exercising against the far right. And how the political left can tackle the vague, populist, and deep rhetorics of the far right. So they provide an example from the UK about a kind of like kind of new left that might be emerging with Jeremy Corbyn and Zach Polanski of the Green Party. An argument that the new kind of Corbyn Sultana party should be a kind of reform or UKIP of the left and match kind of far right populism. With its own kind, and I know Zach Polanski has also talked about this kind of populism. I guess it'd be interesting to know what you think about that, and what you think that kind of like populism or like an alternative form of populism would look like. And Doug asks a kind of specific question about the US around the Democratic Party and where they have kind of failed in recent years. And I wonder if those two are kind of slightly connected. But yeah, any thoughts on this idea of a left populism?
I don't want to take up too much time, but I got a lot of thoughts about this. about the Democratic Party. They're useless, is the thing. They're supposed to be our opposition party, our left party, our liberal party. They're a corporate party. They're a corporate party that have been holding on to power for so long and are so just sort of beholden to the corporate donors and policies that prop up corporate interests that anytime there is a younger or more progressive candidate that breaks through and does get some support, they will go above and beyond to kneecap them, like chase them out of power, smear them, red bait them. I mean, God, look what they've done to Ilhan Omar. Like the amount of racism and Islamophobia that poor woman has had to deal with. Or Rashida Tlaib, one of our only good legislators. She's Palestinian, and the amount of hatred and vitriol she's had to deal with just for acknowledging the humanity of her own people and of people in Palestine to begin with. Like it's unfortunate we don't have a left party that has any sort of recognition or power. We don't have really powerful left figures in this country because that goes against everything that the parties in power support and represent. It's really getting to like kind of a gnarly place though, because the Democratic Party, their approval ratings, woo, they're in the toilet. And that's not really great for normal people because we have big midterm election coming up where we're supposed to elect a whole bunch of new legislators. And if regular people are angry at the Democrats for not delivering anything on wages, on healthcare, on basic human needs, let alone any of their highfalutin rhetoric around saving democracy and human rights, but they don't do anything. And people are like, well, I'm going to vote for this person who doesn't do anything and also kind of talks down to me, doesn't seem to understand where I'm coming from, doesn't seem to get how life is so hard for me right now, a regular working class person. And then you have a Republican candidate who is just as bad, probably almost certainly much worse, but pretends to care, pretends to tell people, oh, I care about you, your struggle as, a former manufacturing worker or a coal miner or, any other insert classic white guy job here. Like it's the immigrants who are causing problems. It's queer people causing problems. Like the choices are really stark here. And one last thing that I will mention in terms of the Democratic Party specifically, and specifically in this moment, the fact that they are so like the party leadership and so many of the highest profile and most powerful members in government, they just refuse to do anything with their power to stop the genocide in Gaza. They close their ranks and actively punish anybody who even mentions perhaps we should cut some aid to Israel. Perhaps we should support the Palestinians. Perhaps we should do something. And that is very much out of step with normal people, with the populace in this country, because we have eyes, we can see what's happening. So I think they're just going to keep falling in relevance unless they do an extreme about face, completely reform the whole party, bring in an entirely new crop of leadership. But they're not going to do that because they're all 1 billion years old. They all make way too much money, and they don't care about regular working class people. And we can tell. That's the problem. We can tell they don't care about us. And it's not going to go well for anybody.
Thank you. Yeah, Balazs.
Yeah, thanks. I was just thinking I would be very interested to hear what Kim thinks about this, but I've been following American politics a bit more closely lately, and I feel like I have some hope. I feel like we might be witnessing a sort of populist moment 2.0 with like people like Zoran Mamdani or Katie Wilson in Seattle, Omar Fateh, I think in Minneapolis, and this new guy Graham Plattner in Maine. There's I think one thing about them is that they're sort of politically brave in that they dare to say certain things like they dare to say capitalism, the word capitalism, or they dare to say uh, genocide and stuff like that. So a sort of political bravery, I think, characterizes them. But an other thing I think is important when it comes to these figures is that they also sort of understand political realism. And what I mean by that is that I think part of the reason the left, besides all the structural reasons, but part of it has been that we have for a long time refused to participate in institutional politics. Like sometimes we are just too smart for our own good. We don't believe in, representation in like bourgeois democracies and stuff like that. But unfortunately, that's where the power is. And sometimes if you want to be in power, you have to accept that, power exists. And that was one thing that the political movement, the green left political movement that I'm involved in, realized in Hungary is that sometimes you just have to come out of your leftist pub and make a political community, which it might have to organize around certain hierarchies to be more effective in politics, obviously in a more in reasonable confines. Yeah, just referring back to previous question, I do think that the way the right approaches hierarchies is insane, and we shouldn't copy that, and we couldn't by principle. But at least we should have some sense of political realism.
Yeah, thanks, Balazs. Josephina, what are your thoughts on this? And kind of also, I'd be interested to hear what you think about populism and how the left can or should or shouldn't use that.
Yeah, I was listening very attentively. It's fascinating to hear, especially what's happening in the US, because I think that a lot of the things that happen in our countries kind of, and these new far-right leaders in countries outside of the US or far away from Europe as well, they're really looking into these countries and seeing how they can copy some of the things and, try and see if they work in our countries, in developing countries. A quick reflection that I wanted to add is, and especially because this is what's happening in Argentina at the moment, and maybe it's an example for all of us to look at and reflect on, is what happens when these far-right movements and far-right political parties, many of them pretty new, when they propose especially a political solution to problems, but especially economic programs that don't work. So when an economic program fails and these parties start to fail, which is kind of what we're seeing here at the moment, is how these movements start pretty quickly, surprisingly fast, falling apart. The infight starts, and I think it's what a lot of analysts are saying here as we watch the Milei administration kind of falling into itself because of the result of the negative for them result of the most recent elections, is how it makes me wonder, do some of these newer parties have a future really? So what happens when what happens when the infight starts? And I think on the other side of that, kind of on if you cross the road from that to the more populist government, more completely left or more left-leaning political movements, these are movements that have many years of history. So they have had many years of experience of, yes, disagreeing in many things, and then agreeing when it's necessary, developing, doing the groundwork, doing the territorial work, at least in many Latin American countries where the more left-leaning political movements have is that they have this connection with people living with the most marginalized people. Right-wing parties rarely have that. They say they do, and yes, there is an argument for, with the pandemic and younger generations, they were kind of disenchanted with traditional politics, and then they kind of fell into the arms of the far right. But in truth, what we're seeing when it comes to then voting, which is in the end what matters when people go and decide who do they want to be in power, what we're seeing is that these movements don't really have that connection, that real connection with the people. But in short, I think to me a big question to ask is kind of what happens with these movements when their economic programs fail, if they have any future. In Argentina, I think that is a big question mark, which kind of gives many of us hope in a way.
So interesting. So we talk about that from a little bit of a different perspective here. What happens when Trump dies? Because he's old as hell. He's not in good shape. Dude clearly just had a stroke. There's this sort of cult figure aspect to the far right that I think is a lot different from what you're describing, because we have this figurehead, like literally the Mad King, and he's not gonna last forever. What happens when the Mad King falls? Like the policies that his party are pushing are incredibly unpopular. They're already sending us into a recession, already destroyed so many trade relationships with other countries. Like, what happens when it clearly doesn't work and the Mad King is gone? Can they maintain this sort of momentum? And I'm so curious to find out. I'm not thrilled to have to live through it, but I am very curious nonetheless.
Yeah, it's interesting, this kind of like cult of personality, and I guess we've seen it in other countries as well. And we see it like not just in party politics, but in figures like social media commentators and other kind of leaders. Beth, did you have anything you wanted to add before we move on?
Yeah, I guess just that especially with Trump, I mean, his last administration, the same sort of terrible fallout happened, maybe not to the same degree as this, but and people did vote for him again. So there is an element as well of I don't know, memory loss, or in the end, it's sort of people's values and that come before whether it improves their material conditions or not. And I think also something that Balazs and Connor worked on this a bit in the magazine, but to what degree are far-right figures today almost just puppets for a kind of undercurrent of reactionary forces that want to put these figureheads into power so they can keep making money, and they're just going to keep recycling people, and we're going to keep having a return to far-right projects until we kind of dismantle the whole system that puts them there in the first place. But then that just becomes a huge, bigger topic that becomes a bit less hopeful to talk about, especially as we're coming to the end of the hour. But yeah, just something I wanted to mention as well.
Yeah, I mean, on that, like with everything in so many places, I mean, in the UK, we've had a kind of hysteria around flags, which has kind of come from this kind of ideas around immigration and all of this. And it can feel like kind of a scary time. Like what do you guys look at for, like, how do you find hope in these kind of times? Yeah, anyone got any tips to share before we finish?
I still believe in people. You know, things have been very, very, very bad before, right? Uh, Perhaps it's looked different or manifested itself in different ways, but terrible authoritarian rulers and governments have been a part of this world since someone got the bright idea that we should stop hunting and gathering and start farms. Humanity's made it through all that. I do have faith in the power of people to organize, to look out for their neighbors, to kind of think differently, to think bigger, to even think globally. I mean, things in the States are really dark right now, but I also know so many people who are organizing, whether they're putting together neighborhood ice watches or raising money for Palestinian children or taking their trans friends to the gun range because we got to protect the dolls. Like there's so many ways that you can make the world a little bit better, even if it's just your block, just your neighborhood, just your city. That matters. That's something. We can't overthrow the government tomorrow. I mean, I have to go to the dentist, I'm busy, but we can make positive changes happen. And we can keep talking to people and trying to educate them. In the States, we have our education system and our media ecosystem garbage. But if you're privileged enough and lucky enough to know how to find real news, real information, real history, and can share it with people, that's how people learn, that's how people grow, and that's how people survive these kinds of eras. Like, I don't have any faith in the government, I don't have faith in any institutions, but I do have faith in the people, and I think we're going to get through this together.
Thank you. Any other tips that anyone has for kind of holding on to hope in these times?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the hope and the answer is for sure on the people. That's our story was all about reporting what people are doing on the streets. The power of social media and the power that the fact that we can connect and we are kind of across the world and we can talk and discuss these issues, but also the power of people taking to the streets and making their voices heard and demanding changes and getting together, forming communities and across issues. I mean, I cover every protest that happens in Buenos Aires, and it's fascinating to see where in a protest where people are pensioners, 80-year-olds demanding a better pension, and at the same time demanding for the end of the genocide in Gaza. And that to me says community, and that ultimately all of these, there is something that we can all do for all of this to pass and for all to show that there is more of us than there is of them. So I think we cannot lose hope, and there is something big or small that all of us can do. So, yeah.
Thank you. And Balazs and Beth, I wondered if you had any thoughts, and also maybe also on kind of how to reach maybe your more young people, which was something that Webster raised in the chat.
Yeah, I guess the successes of Mamdani have kind of rippled around as well. I don't know if it's being viewed as positive in the US with everything else that's going on, but I think the fact that someone could stand on a platform of improving people's material conditions, of having these community grocery stores, that this was something that people really won people over at young people as well. There is a different way of doing politics and it can win popular support. And maybe that's a model that we can replicate in other places.
Thanks, Beth.
Yeah, I just think we need to keep fighting because there's nothing else to do. Yeah, I just on a more practical note, I think everyone should learn digital organizing because it's a really powerful tool. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap up pretty soon. Sorry, we didn't get to everyone's questions. There were so many, but it's really, really great to have you all here. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And we're really grateful for your interest in this topic and your support of new internationalist journalism. And you can view some of our articles on our website for free. But please do consider becoming a subscriber to access the full issue, including our 50-year digital archive, and support independent media. And you can subscribe today with the code REWIRE to save 10% on an annual subscription. And then you also get our special far right edition for free. And I believe that like my colleagues have put a link in the chat of how to do that. So our next issue of the magazine will come out in mid-October, and that will be about Palestinian resistance. And then later on this year, we're also going to be looking at the kind of new nuclear arms race. So we've got a lot of things to cover. But we'll circulate a recording of this panel, and it will be on our YouTube channel. But for now, thanks to everyone for coming. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your days and evenings. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.